So you've had an exhausting week and you decide to pour yourself a drink. You know, you deserve it. Next Friday you feel tired again, so you juice yourself up again. Next Friday you're completely drained, so you decide again to drink a beverage heartily. This time, however, mid-sipping, an alarming thought penetrates your conscience. Am I becoming an alcoholic? Through the analysis of the film Another Round, this video will help you answer the question. According to Norwegian philosopher Finn Skårderud's hypothesis, human beings are born with a deficit of 0.5 per mils of alcohol in their blood. In other words, humans need about 2 glasses of wine to feel better and get their creativity, courage, and open-mindedness boosted. Rather than testing this hypothesis, Another Round employs it to depict the alcoholic bridge between how alcohol can open up a life but also demolish another. The film follows the mundane existence of 4 teachers, the leading character Martin and his 3 best friends, Tommy, Nikolai, and Peta. The director Thomas Vinterberg contrasts these 4 people having the midlife blues and the same 4 people after getting juiced up. During the expositional scenes with families, teachers, and parents, the barely moving camera is set in unison with the edgy diegetic sounds. However, when the friends get inebriated, they start dancing while the flying camera raves around them. Put differently, the smoothness of being spirited neutralizes the awkwardness of being sober and lifeless. As the characters start testing Skårderud's hypothesis, which initially vivifies their souls, the viewer inevitably begins to wonder whether the little experiment will come to grief in the end. Since there can't be any thematic progression if the characters simply maintain the 0.5 per mils and never go higher, the only logical development is this: they start drinking, they have fun, but ultimately they take it too far. And that's precisely what happens during the film's developmental middle. However, the film's screenwriters, Vinterberg and Lindholm, carefully intertwine another thematic concept within the predictable narrative line where everything goes bonkers. After Peta drinks during his music class, one might expect that his students will find out or that he won't be able to finish the lesson because he'll get drunk. However, his students start singing better than ever. The same goes for Martin, who after liquoring up, gains better control of his classroom, and for the first time, his students listen to him teach in awe. Consequently, the 4 mates decide to increase the per mils, being cognizant of the trade-offs, and it's all fun and games for a while. Though, as expected, they all wreck themselves one night and they discontinue the experiment. It turns out, however, that the experiment has enkindled Tommy's alcoholism, which engenders the friend's deploration to have launched the experiment. But does it actually? As mentioned, the film illuminates the alcoholic bridge between freedom and oblivion. Alcohol can either give you wings or can squelch you. However, the main character Martin isn't on the bridge. Because of the development of Tommy's alcoholism, he might be thinking he's on it, but the film's historical examples and the juxtaposition of character traits denote otherwise. During his history class, Martin talks about Hemingway and Churchill. However successful, the American writer died, more or less, due to his heavy drinking, and the hedonist Churchill, having smoked around 200,000 cigars and drunk copious amounts of spirits during his lifetime, lived until he was 90. During the press conference at the San Sebastian Film Festival, Vinterberg pondered whether Churchill would have been that successful as a leader during the Second World War if he wasn't drinking so much. One will never know, but his film elegantly indicates why people like Churchill were allowed to live long enough to accomplish glory. According to the DSM-4 criteria for alcohol use independence, Hemingway can be deemed an alcoholic, Churchill can't. The first criterion manifesting potential alcoholism the clearest is spending a lot of time drinking, something that both Hemingway and Churchill were famous for. Though, to label somebody an alcoholic, one should also examine the consumption's effects on their health and life. So, let's compare Hemingway and Churchill by using the criteria. To cope with his depression and the physical pain following various unlucky experiences, Hemingway gradually increased the heaviness of his drinking. If you're curious about his ordeals, I can just let you know that throughout his life, Hemingway suffered from malaria, dysentery, skin cancer, and was almost killed in 2 back-to-back plane crashes, rupturing most of his organs and leaving first-degree burns over much of his body. In contrast, Churchill's consumption remained constant during his lifetime. Since most of his permanent maladies were explained by alcohol intoxication, Hemingway's doctors urged him to stop drinking, but he never could. On the other hand, in 1936, Churchill won a bet with a friend who challenged him to abstain from drinking hard liquor for a year. Following his father's death, Hemingway not only started to drink more heavily, but his behavior became violent and self-destructive. His biographers are sanguine that his accident-prone behavior might not have been coincidental. In contrast, Churchill never seemed to have social or occupational troubles owing to his drinking. He wrote more than 50 books in 80 volumes, painted over 500 paintings, was the highest paid journalist in the world at some point, and of course led Britain to victory in World War II. Also, biographers claim there's no evidence of Churchill consuming alcohol to avoid symptoms of withdrawal, and it isn't documented whether Churchill ever suffered withdrawal at all. Following this comparison, one can assume that Hemingway's life partly plummeted due to alcoholism, Churchill's didn't. However, Hemingway managed to abstain from drinking when writing, or as the DSM-4 criteria shows, he never gave up on activities important or interesting to him to drink. This is because during his most creatively successful years, Hemingway's life goal wasn't to get drunk, but to write and write and write. He was confident that drinking and writing were not an optimal combo. He wrote in the morning and didn't start drinking until the afternoon. But after suffering 6 untreated concussions, owing mostly to his self-destructive behavior, he was engulfed by depression and paranoia. And despite the psychological treatments afterwards, his life goal altered permanently. He didn't want to write anymore. He wanted to commit suicide. Let's talk genetics. 7 of Hemingway's close family relations died by suicide, including his father, sister, and brother. Scientifically speaking, the failure to treat mental health issues and the effect of the physical maladies on one's mentality, compounded by alcohol abuse, lead to suicide. There's no record that Hemingway's father was an alcoholic. However, seriously sick with diabetes and heart disease, and suffering losses from investments and real estate, he developed depression and then committed suicide. It seems that something forced the Hemingway family members to end things. According to psychologists, part of the resounding impact of suicide on families is that relatives fear it runs in the family. They identify with the committer as their relative, yearn to be with them, and after grieving so hard, the unconscious fantasy to reconnect with them is enkindled, which might lead to the irresistible urge to take their own lives. Hence, it's not a surprise that after his father's suicide, Hemingway wrote, "I'll probably go the same way." Suppose one searches for possible genetic explanations to why heavy drinking doesn't always lead to alcoholism. In that case, one should consider that specific genes alter how alcohol metabolizing enzymes work, which changes how alcohol affects one's brain. The enzymes in our livers, the so-called alcohol dehydrogenases, break down toxic alcohol so that our brain is less affected by alcohol consumption. A study shows that people with better working enzymes drink less and are at a lower risk of alcoholism than people with slower working enzymes. So what if Churchill's and Martin's enzymes were like a bat out of hell, and Hemingway's and Tommy's were snail-like? That might be the case, but apart from genetic reasons, one should also consider environmental ones. According to Darwin's theory of natural selection, some individuals have specific characteristics making them more likely to survive and reproduce. With that, they will avoid starvation compared to others and produce offspring that's swifter and slimmer, allowing to repeat the process. In other words, natural selection sorts out the winners, those who have any advantage over others to survive and procreate, however slight the advantage may be. But not only physical traits are vital, but also one's adaptation to the environment. Natural selection also occurs among humans, where it affects not only one's survival rates, but also changes one's status within the environment. For instance, the stereotypical nerd, the short-sighted introverts obsessed with numbers who are devoid of social skills or muscular development used to be the quintessence of a sad life. Then again, with the nascency of technology, nerd characteristics began to be extremely valuable. Therefore, humans aren't evolving now, or at least too slowly to matter, but the ever-changing environment urges people to adapt, and those who can't fall defeated. Our biology burdens us with numerous cognitive habits that were sensible when they evolved. For example, habits around food, sex, anxiety, and excitement. But now, they hinder our effectiveness in the modern world. For example, we find it hard not to overeat. Centuries ago, food supply was scarce, and now supermarkets abound with numerous brands of foodstuffs. Or one finds it hard to distinguish real threats from baseless anxieties. When people are raising awareness about diseases, it's beneficial for many reasons, but it makes us more worried about us having a disease. And with the increase in stress, people drink more alcohol. A study shows that apart from economic growth, Stress is another important variable leading to higher alcohol consumption and more cases of alcoholism, something that is clearly manifested during the COVID-19 pandemic. More and more people tend to cope with the health and economic influences of the disease by drinking more than ever. Because of the global uncertainty, we can assume that almost every person is anxious about their future and might have begun a liquor therapy. But why haven't we all become alcoholics? Darwin asserts that changes to the environment can dramatically alter which members of a species will thrive within it. When one contextualizes this within the COVID-19 frame, one infers that more people are believed to become alcoholics, which is a statistical fact, but some people will be able to endure. Another round offers us a glimpse into Darwin's natural selection by illuminating the traits of Martin, who manages to adapt to the new alcoholic environment, and Tommy, who develops alcoholism and hence falls defeated. Both Martin and Tommy are bored by their job, and after getting juiced up, they become more confident and thriving in the classroom. However, Tommy's life changes for the worse. Martin's doesn't. Why? Martin is innately a sensible problem solver, whereas Tommy is sloppy, grubby, and passive. After realizing he has lost the connection with his wife, Martin faces the issue and attempts to rejuvenate his marriage. He asks his wife whether he has become boring and discusses ways with her to enliven their marriage. For example, they go on a canoeing holiday where they jazz up their sex life. Also, when his students' parents confront him about their children's low grades, he is willing to improve the situation at any cost, even if that means the assignment of a new teacher. In contrast, Tommy seems to have never attempted to reunite with his ex, even though he still bears her in his heart. Also, after every night of heavy drinking, Martin cleans the houses, even Tommy's, from all the bottles and any additional trash, whereas Tommy, before a night out, mentions that nobody will notice if he doesn't change his decrepit socks. Even though Martin is the one who offers the friends to go higher than 0.5 per mils, he liquors up while dancing with his mates or enjoying a vivifying tune by himself. On the other hand, Tommy seems only to desire an increase in consumption just for the sake of it. For example, his facial expressions denote that he isn't interested in the classical music piece Martin, Nikolai, and Peta are enjoying while drinking. Also, Tommy is quite sloppy. He stashes a half-dozen liquor bottles in the school sports equipment area so clumsily that the janitor finds them immediately. All these differences in the two friends' personalities presuppose the following outcome. Tommy appears drunk in school, feels intimidated when Martin warns him about the possibility of self-destructive behavior, and his first thought after waking up is to open the fridge and grab the bottle. Yet Martin remains the sensible problem solver the viewer has known from the start. For example, according to the hypothesis, one mustn't drink after 8 p.m. So when Martin sees it's 8:11, he begins to sip water. And when his family members find out about the experiment, he admits it and humbly addresses his actions. This doesn't sound like an alcoholic's behavior because an alcoholic would rarely admit what they're doing and why it's wrong. Following the DSM-4 criteria, both of them spent a lot of time with a bottle and gradually increased the heaviness of their drinking. However, only Tommy could never stop himself from drinking, had job troubles, continued to drink even though it was causing trouble with friends, and had given up on activities that were important or interesting to him. For example, the football team he coached. In a Darwinian context, another round claims that being a sensible problem solver gives you an advantage over sloppy and passive people when the environment becomes alcoholic. With the Martin-Tommy comparison, director Thomas Vinterberg lends the viewers the eyes of the nature, so one can observe the miniaturized alcoholic world where natural selection decides who becomes an alcoholic and who gets to exploit the liquor's good qualities. In reality, however, humans don't have the eyes of the nature, and it remains unknown whether one is destined to be an alcoholic or not. So, people should often examine the side of the bridge they're approaching. Checking if you cover the DSM-4 criteria is a good start. So, in conclusion, enjoy your beverage, but respect yourself.